and welcome to Spotlight with Sandhya. It's important to listen to people who have a different take on things, whose line of thinking is quite different from that of popular opinion, especially when they can back their statements with solid research. Joining us on the show today is an expert on public policy, public finance, and international relations. And he's of the opinion that Prime Minister Narendra Modi can be faulted for some, but not all, his decisions concerning the pandemic. Let's hear from Pranay Otasthane, the Deputy Director of the Takshashila Institution. Interestingly, Pranay was an engineer before moving to public policy research. Hi Pranay and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sandhya. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Okay, let's get straight to it with these vaccine policy, especially the vaccine diplomacy. Most people, including me, I have to admit, were against this. And we thought, why is our country giving away vaccines that could be used for our own people? And true enough, in the last few months, our worst fears have come true and we are living through it with a dearth of vaccines for Indians. But you have a different opinion and you say that the vaccine diplomacy is a good thing. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Before I begin, I should say that, my day job is that of a policy analyst. And one of the cardinal rules to analyze policy is that we analyze policies by their consequences and not by their intentions or by the political parties in charge, right? So, which means I can hold two opposite views about the same government depending on the policy that we are talking about, right? And it's a very difficult concept for many people to understand, because when I say that vaccine diplomacy was a better policy, people might think that I'm supporting one government or a party or something like that. So that out of the way, first of all, this government has faltered in many ways in the pandemic response, and the fact that there are thousands of people dying still every day just shows the seriousness of the problem and the fact that we should hold our government responsible for a lot of things that we haven't. But what I felt is that we were focusing on the less important issues and we were dissipating our criticism on the areas that are super important. So that's why I sort of wrote an article saying that there are three different things that we are focusing on and they are not the most important one right now. Okay. So now let me begin on vaccine diplomacy itself. Now, in retrospect, yes, it seems like a big mistake, right? And that's the dominant narrative. But I think it was a gamble that the government took for the right reasons, and probably it has gone wrong in retrospect. Okay, so let me look at it from two different lenses. One is a realist, hard-nosed realist lens, and one is an ethical lens. And I'll try to make my point from both angles. So first, consider the situation when this began, right? Like the government at that point of time, remember, the point was not that there is shortage of vaccine doses. The point was that there is excess of vaccine supply, and in fact there was a fear that many of these doses will go waste, right? Because there was just 1.5 million uptake every day. It was only open to the priority sector, essential services, etc., right? So in fact there were lots of vaccines which were there, and there wasn't enough demand, right, in the initial stages. So that was when this vaccine diplomacy started, and I think the role was that the government was trying to signal the positive role that that India can play in the world order, right? Remember, India is a big vaccine manufacturing powerhouse, and it was a calculation that India can contribute to the world in a positive way in this particular area, right? In many other areas we are not good at manufacturing, but in this area we were. So the idea was, why not do that, especially for the countries which are in our neighborhood, countries which look up to India for support, right? So I think that was the aim. And if you look at the facts also, right, the amount of total vaccines which were given as gifts were totally 10 million. That just amounts to like 5 days of extra vaccination at the current rate, right? Just 5 days. And the rest of the majority, in fact, 35 million doses were given through the commercial contract routes. And it would have been really foolhardy for the government to have blocked commercial exports at that particular point of time, because remember, these vaccines are not as if, for especially Covishield, the technology comes from outside, right? If India were to block supplies to the others, then it would have had to pay a lot of price going down the line. Right now, remember, we are asking for vaccine raw material supply. Other countries could have blocked it because we did the same a few months back, right? So I think it was a gamble that the government took, and for India's own national interest. I'm not even bringing the ethical argument at this point. I'm just saying that the government said that, this is one way where India can play a positive role. And that's what it tried to do. And they did a bit of it through the gifts route, and most of it was through the commercial route, right? So this was like the realist argument. The second argument is ethical lens. So even if you look at it ethically, those vaccine doses did save lives, right? Like, it was not as if they went to waste. So you can also claim that, even if you are from a humanitarian or liberal point of view, that it did save lives, right? So I would say that also should be not forgotten. Now, so where am I getting at? I'm not saying that the union government wasn't wrong, and in fact, it must be held accountable for its mistakes. What I'm saying is that it's important to identify what the mistake was. And I think the original sin here was especially this, that the government just didn't imagine that the second wave would hit this big, even though it hit all other countries, right? Everyone, we knew that US had faced 2 or 3 waves by then, and the government just ignored that point, right? And I think that's where the main thing is. Of course, we also ran into a bad luck that there was a new variant, in fact 2 new variants, which affected India, and that's why the second wave was really, really more serious. But regardless, government has great money at its disposal, it has great expertise at its disposal. It didn't pay heed to that, and I think that's where the mistake really lies. I'll just say that it's important to internalize the right lessons, because what happens is, if we are going to say India should never do vaccine diplomacy, or India shouldn't do any of these things when the world is in problems, then we are actually that's not how international relations work. In fact, every big power, every great power will try to pitch in humanitarian relief, even though there might be its own citizens who are affected. So that's how the norms have evolved, and that's what India was doing. It's, in some ways, it is the same as saying India shouldn't go to space because we are poor, right? I mean, yeah, we can do different things, and why shouldn't we do that? So also there's this angle, people in the foreign policy community especially, they have really long retention of certain incidents. So they will say, no, India shouldn't go anywhere abroad, because remember in 1989 or 80s how Indian peacekeeping force in Sri Lanka faced a failure. So the idea is, if we internalize that lesson, we are just going to say, never again should India do anything positive until and unless it has done everything domestically, which is not quite practical. So that was like my long argument.
Fair enough. I want to touch upon a paper that you and your colleagues had written in December. I think you had proposed a plan to vaccinate 80% of Indians by the end of this year. That was before the vaccines were rolled out. Now that the vaccines have rolled out, and I don't see even 30% of Indians being vaccinated by the end of the year, going by what we've been experiencing. So where do you think the government went wrong? And is there any way at all they can salvage the situation now?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. So that was a paper that a multidisciplinary team at Takshashila had come up with. So there were biologists, lawyers, public policy analysts, economists working together on this. And the idea back then was, in fact, the paper actually came out in August, September. So it was way before any of these vaccines were we knew that the vaccines would be coming out so early. The thinking was just that even if the science sorts itself out, the real challenge will be the public policy challenge, right? How do you distribute these vaccines? So
Implementation.
yeah, so that was our main thought process behind it. And we divided into stages. How do we distribute it? How do we secure supply? How do we prioritize? And how do we finally track people who've been given these vaccines, right? So there were these 4 5 stages. I think where the government really went wrong was in the second stage, which was securing supply. So there were a lot of things that the government could have done. So, for example, our paper also says that one, strike quick agreements with foreign vaccine manufacturers. Remember, US, etc., did this even before the trial data and results were out, right? So they took a bet. We didn't. We thought, yeah, maybe we will get along and muddle our way through. So that was one thing. The second one was the government could play a big role in actually incentivizing vaccine manufacturing within India as well, because you need a lot of money, you need a lot of research to go on, you need facilities, you need raw materials which are not necessarily made in India. So there's a big government role to help some of our vaccine manufacturers to override these constraints and quickly produce vaccines, right? So that again was not done. We saw what the CEO of SII mentioned about the fact that they were not getting raw materials, etc. Right? So I think that was one more issue that we didn't sort out. The third one was mainly on intellectual property rights, etc. as well. I think if the government would have said that, if some vaccine has been approved by FDA or some such reputed agency elsewhere, we'll just take it in India. We'll not do any trials. We'll authorize it for emergency use. That's, by the way, still not done, right? I mean, the current debate that Moderna and Pfizer are having, they are not supplying to the states because they are saying the union government has not even is not clear on two issues. In fact, one, whether they have to do a trial in India also or not. Most countries waived that off, but India is still confused about it. And of course, the second issue was also about liability and who is liable if something goes wrong. Most countries again said the governments took the responsibility, but government is still not committed to that issue, right? So they are saying, why the hell should I get into it? There are enough buyers outside the world at this stage. So that's my point. I think the key mistake we went was on securing supply. Distribution also has its problems, but I don't think that's the main constraint as of now. It will start becoming the main constraint once our supply rises.
So the biggest problem was that it failed to take a decision on procuring the vaccines early enough. And even now it's lagging its feet and basically just burying its head in the sand and thinking it's going to go away somehow, because I don't see anybody addressing this issue at all.
And Sandhya, I would just add that now with the situation that we are in, and given the raw materials are not in supply on many of these things, we are looking at a slow pace for some time. So it's not going to be that suddenly 2 months down the line all of us are going to get vaccinated, even if the government does everything it can starting now. So best case estimates that I read from some of the papers were that by August we'll hit 20 crore doses run rate. So it will be every month you will have 20 crore doses. So that still means 5-6 months in fact for one dose. And in fact, it will maybe around 13 months to cover the entire population. So that's the reality of the situation that we are in now, unfortunately.
Let's talk about something other than the vaccine policy, but something which concerns the funding for the vaccine. One of the aspects is that the government has not enough funds to deal with the crisis, not just for the vaccines, but in providing adequate health care. In my opinion, the government should have made available free healthcare to every affected patient. That seems really like a pipe dream at this point. While all this is happening, the Central Vista project is being built, this great monument, which is already contentious enough because of the historic and the the architectural value of the buildings that have been raised to make way for it, and it's cost 20,000 crores of rupees. Now, most people are asking, why are you going ahead and building that? Why can't you use that money for vaccine, for COVID relief, for, I don't know, maybe injecting stimulus into the economy? Many uses for that money. But you think the Central Vista project should not be stopped at this point. Could you care to explain why do you think that?
Yeah, I'll qualify that. I didn't say that the Central Vista project shouldn't be stopped. I said that the economic argument being used for it doesn't make sense. So, yeah, you're right. There are, in fact, the environmental impact assessment has not been done for some things. The heritage angle is also there. And I am not qualified to judge that. But I am a public finance student. So I was only tackling this argument that, this money can be used somewhere else. That I don't think makes sense. The reason why it is, first of all, that 20,000 crores is not being spent this year, right? It is over many years. Also, it's for building a parliament as well. We are going to have a much bigger parliament after the 2031 census. So, it's a priority of the government for some reason, and I don't have any good reason to say why it shouldn't be done for money reasons. So that's sort of the one point. The second thing is, it might make sense from a political perspective, but just by saving 2,000 crore rupees this year, we are not going to suddenly magically create new hospitals or magically create new oxygen cylinders. The problem is not money. The problem is elsewhere, right? There are supply constraints, or there are raw materials which are not available and things like that, right? So in fact, as I said, this 2,000 crore is just 0.05% of the union government budget. Just by saving you 0.05% budget, I don't think we are going to do great things. The second point is, unlike a household where we have our money supply is limited, right? We can't live beyond our means and maybe beyond our credit cards, but not for a long time. But it's not like that with the state. State lives forever, right? It's almost semi-permanent. So a state can always run deficits. And in fact, that's what governments do. So governments can always monetize deficit, which means effectively printing money when they are short, when they really need money. And I think this current scenario that we are in, a raging pandemic, is a good enough case for the government to actually do whatever it takes to get vaccines, and that would require much more money than what we are talking about. 2,000 crore is actually chump change for union government, really. So I think Central Vista project is important to debate in other aspects, but its connection from an economic perspective to COVID-19 is quite weak. Whether you do it or you don't do it, it's not going to solve your basic problem, which is lack of healthcare facilities.
All right. So I'm going to refer to a couple of other publications that you have either written or edited, and I want you to dwell upon some interesting issues from there. There's this paper, An Agenda for India to Prosper in a Post-COVID World. And I think you co-edited Reshaping the Post-Pandemic World Order. One of the things that came up was that there's likely to be two blocks. In scenario one, which is a good scenario where India has sufficient power, and if it's handled its internal issues well, it can actually walk a delicate balance between US and China. Or if it has become weak enough, it has to go along with the US. Now, what is your prediction? Which way do you think India is going to go?
Right. Thanks for reading the paper. So, yeah. Right. So, yeah, that was a scenario analysis which we'd done, looking at where India is going after this pandemic and what would be the implications from an international relations perspective. And the sort of two scenarios were that, if our economy kickstarts again, we are again on a high growth trajectory, then we are sort of a better swing power, right? By swing power, I mean we should be able to. This is a term coined by my senior colleague Nitin Pai. So the idea was that a swing power is a one which is able to deliver sufficient pain or sufficient pleasure depending on who the side is, and whichever side it is on is the winning side, right? So that's what a swing power is. Now, what has happened with India is with the economy going down, and with 2021 again being not a great year, what we are going to see is that if you look at this pain versus pleasure thing, India will still be important from the fact that it can deliver a lot of benefits to other countries, right? Just because the market is huge, it's still a growing economy. It's still that there are young people. The population is going to still increase. So, demand will still grow, market will grow, and many countries would court India just for that, right? So, India can still deliver benefits to many countries. But it's the second part, delivering pain, which has sort of reduced because of what has happened, right? So, how do you deliver pain? I mean, just look at how China does, right? Because it is supplying to many players, it is supplying 5G equipment, etc. It can do a lot of things just because of its economic heft. But we are being constrained because of that, right? So the our ability to deliver pain to a country which is not acting according to our interests has sort of reduced. And for that reason, what we'd argued is that it is better if this scenario occurs, it is better for India to actually take help not just of the US but any other country which can quickly accelerate its economic trajectory, right? So currently the geopolitical climate is such that China has angered everyone, many countries rather, and other countries are ready to take on China. So that's the opportunity for India, like if there's a quad grouping formed and that quad grouping wants to take on China, and in return India is able to take advantage of this quad for its own benefit and for it building its own economic power, we should do it, and the main point is, again, like I told you, that there is this retention from the past that plays out in foreign policy. Even here it's this, we have a very negative connotation of the US in our foreign policy circles, that if we do anything with the US, we are going back to the colonial times, or we are doing their job, and we are sort of one level lower than them. Such things are there. I don't think that's any point. I mean, India is a big enough power still, and every country in the world recognizes that. So it's just about us not letting those old notions come in the way of forming stronger partnerships with the Western countries and for our own benefit. That's what my argument would be.
Like the millennials would say, move on, man. That's what you would like to tell our foreign policy makers. On that note, when you say the whole world has been angered by China and they would like to take it on, our neighbor down south, Sri Lanka, is certainly using China, and it's going to be a strong point of contention for India, isn't it? Just the recent one where they're going to have that entire harbor city bankrolled by China, isn't it going to be a threat to India?
Yeah, so that's Hambantota, right? And that itself has run into a lot of difficulties. But, there is a difference, So small states and India state, there is a big difference, So when you look at all of India's neighbors, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh to a lesser extent, Sri Lanka, all these are smaller states which still have really close connections with India. And after the economies have sort of moved to a liberalization path, it perfectly makes sense for a small state to play two big players against each other for their own benefit. That's how international relations operate. So Nepal will play India against China because China can give them a lot of benefits. So they will play that. Even Sri Lanka is doing that. So that is fine. I mean, I'm sure whatever they do on that count, India's importance to them is still way more important than what China's is. So they'll play that game, and that's their right and prerogative to play. But look at India. India is a big sized player. It's not like Sri Lanka. When India takes a stance, it makes a big difference across the world, so that's why, I mean, just look at vaccine manufacturing, for example, right? That just shows, even in a manufacturing sector where India is not the best player in the world, we still have certain sectors where India can actually make a difference to the world, so that's why I would put Sri Lanka and India in different categories. These will be challenges. There are Maldives is doing something, Sri Lanka is doing something to coach both India and China. But I'm sure our foreign policy makers can play this game as well, and you're seeing that already playing out with Bangladesh. We are trying to build closer ties and things like that, so I think we can tide over. And I'm not so worried about China being in this area. India has the strength and the longevity to play a positive role.
Thank you for being on the show, Pranay. And to our audience, this show is all about asking questions about relevant topics and seeking informed answers. If you would like to know more about any particular subject, leave a comment here or send me a mail at sandhya@raintreemedia.com. Until I'm back again with another interesting guest, take care and bye-bye.